There are hundreds of abandoned towns scattered across the world, but some of them feel different. Some were wiped off the map by environmental disasters. Others were built in total secrecy for nuclear programs, Cold War experiments, or classified research projects. These were towns created, funded, or controlled by governments, and when their purpose was finished or became dangerous, they were simply erased. It all started when the US government quietly erased 2 entire farming towns overnight. In 1943, during the Manhattan Project, the US government selected a section of southeastern Washington to build the world's first large-scale plutonium production complex. Standing in the way were 2 small agricultural communities called White Bluffs and Hanford. Residents were told they had a few weeks to pack up and leave. Some were given only days. They were not told why. Both towns were bulldozed, graveyards were dug up and relocated, entire neighborhoods disappeared, and in their place rose the Hanford nuclear site, which produced the plutonium used in the Trinity test and the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. After the Cold War, Hanford became one of the most contaminated places in the United States. Radiation, nuclear waste tanks, and buried chemicals turned the old town sites into a restricted zone. Today, the remains of White Bluffs and Hanford are still off limits, locked behind miles of fencing. The land is so contaminated that experts estimate cleanup will continue for decades. It began with a bargain so cheap it seemed impossible to refuse. In the early 1970s, Times Beach was a quiet riverside town near St. Louis with dirt roads that kicked up dust clouds whenever cars passed through. The town hired a waste hauler named Russell Bliss to spray oil on the roads to keep the dust down. What residents did not know was that Bliss had been mixing the oil with leftover industrial waste from a chemical plant that produced Agent Orange. The waste contained one of the most toxic forms of dioxin ever manufactured. After people started getting sick, animals began dying, and soil tests came back with some of the highest dioxin levels ever recorded, the government evacuated the entire town. In 1983, the US bought every home, every business, and every piece of property. The entire town was destroyed. Today, Times Beach no longer appears on maps. Only a memorial plaque marks where the town once stood. Pyramiden, located on the Svalbard archipelago, was a Soviet coal mining settlement the USSR purchased from Sweden in 1927. By the height of the Cold War, it was a fully functioning community with schools, a cultural center, a hospital, a sports complex, and the northernmost grand piano on Earth. But the Soviet collapse in the 1990s was brutal. Funding dried up, the mine became unprofitable, and in 1998, officials ordered the entire town to be evacuated. People left so quickly that many belongings were never even taken. Newspapers from 1998 still sit on tables. Soviet propaganda still hangs on the walls. The coal carts are still waiting by the tracks. Pyramiden is now government-owned, but abandoned. A few caretakers maintain basic structures, but the town is silent. It is one of the only places in the world where the Soviet Union is still preserved exactly as it was. Residents woke up one morning to sirens telling them to leave, and most never returned. Futaba, located near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, was one of the towns evacuated after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami triggered a nuclear meltdown. One district, Yamashita, lies directly within the restricted exclusion zone. Here, homes remain exactly as people left them. Bicycles are still parked at school, calendars are frozen on March 2011, weeds have grown into living rooms, entire blocks are collapsing into the streets after years of neglect. Although some areas of Futaba have reopened, Yamashita district remains uninhabitable. It is patrolled, fenced, and monitored constantly because radiation levels in certain spots remain dangerously high. The Japanese government expects some parts will not be safe again for decades.
Back in 1942, the British government quietly bought Grunard Island off the coast of Scotland and turned it into a biological weapons testing site. The mission was to see if anthrax could be weaponized. Scientists from Porton Down, Britain's secretive chemical warfare lab, loaded explosives with anthrax spores and dropped them on the island, wiping out flocks of sheep. Well, the spores stuck around. Anthrax clings to soil for decades, and Grunard was so contaminated that the government sealed it off for nearly 50 years. It was often referred to as Anthrax Island. Nobody lived there after the test, and for decades there were warning signs everywhere. But then in 1986, the British government finally tried to clean it up, spraying 280 tons of formaldehyde and digging out the worst of the topsoil. In 1990, a junior defense minister even went on TV, picking up a handful of dirt to prove that it was safe again. But nobody was all that enthusiastic about coming back to the place, and the island is still empty to this day. Kantubek was a tiny Soviet town in Vozrozhdenia Island in what's now Uzbekistan. About 1,500 people lived there. They were mostly scientists and their families who worked at Aralsk-7, a massive biological weapons lab in the middle of the island. This place wasn't just big, it was the biggest bioweapons testing site on the planet during the Cold War. But for all that size, the safety standards were a total joke. In 1971, a smallpox test went wrong, 10 people got infected, 3 died, and it almost caused a global outbreak. That alone should have been enough to shut it all down, but it didn't. A year later, 2 fishermen were found dead. They'd been exposed to the bubonic plague, again from the lab, and then a whole bunch of animals started dying off. Fishermen were pulling up nets of dead fish. Not long after, 50,000 antelopes suddenly dropped dead. Meanwhile, Kentubek was being used to dump anthrax waste. The lab was finally shut down in 1991, after the Soviet Union fell. And then in 2002, the US stepped in and helped fund a cleanup to help whatever was left on the island from falling into the wrong hands. Even after all that cleaning though, this island is still very dangerous. Only a few expeditions have been allowed since then, and anyone going in wears full hazmat gear and takes antibiotics just in case. In northeast Kazakhstan, there's a test site called Semipalatinsk, better known as the Polygon. It was the Soviet Union's main nuclear testing zone from 1949 to 1989. And over those 40 years, the Soviets detonated 456 nuclear explosives here. Some were in the air, others were underground. The first Soviet atomic bomb, codenamed First Lightning, was tested here in 1949. The explosions were so massive they left deep craters and cracked the earth open for miles. And at the center of it all, though, was a town, Kurchatov, built to house scientists, engineers, and military workers. It was a secret city, totally off limits to outsiders. But the thing is, nearby villages were often exposed to radiation as well. Locals weren't told what was happening. They just got sick. Hair loss, birth defects, cancer. Some estimates say around 1.5 million people were affected. After the USSR collapsed in 1991, the site was shut down and Kurchatov started to empty out. Today, most of the surrounding area is abandoned. In the late 50s, the US Army decided that it would be a good idea to build a full-on underground base in the middle of the Greenland ice sheet. They called it Camp Century. On paper, it was just a research station to test how people could survive in extreme cold. But in reality, it was part of something called Project Iceworm, which was a secret plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles under the ice, aimed at the Soviet Union. They built 21 tunnels into the glacier, added sleeping quarters, a kitchen, there was even a movie theater, and they powered it all with a portable nuclear reactor. But the plan didn't last. It turns out glaciers have a tendency to move, so the ice started shifting and crushing the tunnels. The reactor had to be removed, and by 1967 the camp was shut down and left behind. Most of it is still buried under the ice, along with leftover fuel, chemicals, and some radioactive waste. When they built it, they figured it would stay frozen forever, but now that ice is starting to melt. So yeah, there's a half-buried nuclear base under Greenland, and nobody's totally sure what kind of mess is sitting under there. Ross Island sits in the Bay of Bengal, just off the coast of India. Back in the 1800s, the British turned it into a prison colony for Indian rebels. They forced prisoners to clear the land and build government buildings, churches, and a fancy British clubhouse. And around the 1870s, doctors started using the inmates for medical experiments, mainly testing out treatments for malaria. They gave people large doses of medication, but the side effects were brutal. There were stories that some of the prisoners were so sick and desperate There were cases of them doing awful things just so they could be executed. Things got that bad. The island was still active during World War II until a massive earthquake hit in 1941. Then the Japanese invaded and the British abandoned the place. After the war, it was left to rot. Now it's completely overgrown. Jungle has taken back almost everything. It's open to tourists, but nobody lives there anymore.
In the 1960s, the US secretly built an entire town under Greenland's ice sheet, and most people never knew it existed. Camp Century was constructed by the US Army as a part of a Cold War project to test whether nuclear missiles could be hidden and fired from beneath the ice. The public was told the camp was for scientific research. In reality, it was connected to something called Project Iceworm, a classified plan to build a network of launch sites underneath Greenland. The camp had sleeping quarters, tunnels, kitchens, a chapel, a hospital, and even a barber shop. Everything operated under the ice. When the ice shifted more quickly than expected, the tunnels began warping. The project was abandoned in 1966. The US left behind machinery, fuel, and radioactive waste from its portable nuclear reactor. Today, the remains of Camp Century are still buried somewhere beneath the ice. As climate change melts parts of Greenland, scientists warn that the hazardous materials may eventually be exposed. The government told residents the ground beneath their homes could collapse at any moment, and they were right. Pitcher was once one of the most productive mining towns in the United States. During World War I and World War II, the government relied heavily on Pitcher's lead and zinc mines, but decades of unregulated mining left behind massive piles of contaminated waste called chat. People started developing severe lead poisoning. Waterways turned orange, and sinkholes began swallowing roads and houses. In 2006, federal officials issued a full buyout of the town. In 2008, an EF4 tornado ripped through the region, destroying much of what remained. Cleanup crews determined it was safer to remove what was left than to rebuild. Today, Pitcher is completely abandoned. Warning signs around the town tell people not to drink the water, breathe the dust, or walk near unstable ground. For decades, the Soviet Union tested some of the most dangerous biological weapons on Earth in total secrecy. Vozrodenya Island, located in the Aral Sea, once housed a Soviet bioweapons laboratory where scientists tested plague, tularemia, and most notoriously, anthrax. At the edge of the island sat the small worker town of Kantubek. Residents were scientists, military personnel, and their families. They had homes, schools, and shops, but everything around them was heavily restricted. Research on deadly pathogens took place just beyond the town limits. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the facility was abandoned. Workers left quickly, the town emptied almost overnight, and years later, US teams discovered that tons of anthrax spores had been buried in pits near Kantubek. The spores were still active, and today the town is completely deserted. Buildings crumble in the desert wind. The Aral Sea has receded, turning the island into a peninsula. Built in the 1950s by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, Mercury served as the main residential community for workers at the Nevada test site. Thousands of nuclear tests were conducted in the surrounding desert, many of them atmospheric during the early years. Mercury had restaurants, dormitories, a bowling alley, a movie theater, and government offices. Everything there was classified. Workers could not talk about their jobs, and many of the projects taking place at the test site remained top secret for years. As testing slowed down in the 1990s, the population shrank. Entire blocks were shuttered. Many buildings were demolished. Today, Mercury still technically exists, but it is a controlled government compound with large sections abandoned, and the public cannot enter. Imagine a town being locked down permanently because of something no one will fully explain. Yumen, once a thriving oil town in western China, was partially abandoned after petroleum productions slowed. But the strangest part came in 2014 when the Chinese government sealed off parts of the town after a resident died from bubonic plague. Armed checkpoints blocked all entry and exit. Entire districts were emptied. Streets were silent. Officials have never released full details about how widespread the infection was or why extreme measures were taken happen so quickly. Satellite imagery shows that some sections of Yumen remain abandoned years later. Homes are empty, businesses are shuttered, large areas appear to have been permanently depopulated without public explanation. A town disappeared because a weapons testing range simply grew around it. Arden was once a small rail town southwest of Las Vegas. In the mid-20th century, the US military expanded weapons testing across Nevada, gradually absorbing huge amounts of land. The area surrounding Arden became part of a classified training and testing corridor. Rail yards closed, businesses shuttered, families moved away. By the 1970s, the town was essentially gone. The government later restricted access to much of the land for defense experiments. Today, only fragments of Arden remain. Old foundations, a few forgotten structures, some railroad remnants. Everything else is part of a vast network of testing grounds used for military research.
Skrunda 1 was a Soviet secret town in Latvia built during the Cold War to support a massive radar station used for early warning against missile attacks. It wasn't on any maps, and unless you had military clearance, you were not getting in. The radar setup was part of a system that tracked launches across Europe. Soldiers, radar operators, and their families lived here. There were around 5,000 people at one point. Once Latvia regained independence in 1991, Russia kept operating the site for a few more years until the deal ran out in 1998. When they left, they didn't take much with them. They blew up one of the radar towers and walked away. The rest of the town was just abandoned. Today, the place is a proper ghost town. Windows are busted out, classrooms are empty, the old apartment blocks are covered in moss and graffiti. It's popular with urban explorers, but officially it's closed to the public. Latvia tried auctioning off the land a few times, but nothing stuck. In 1928, Henry Ford bought a huge piece of land in the Amazon rainforest and decided to build his own town. He called it Fordlandia. I am not kidding. The plan was to grow rubber for his car factories, but instead of just planting trees, he built a full American-style town. There were white picket fences, a movie theater, golf course, a church. It looked like something straight out of Michigan, but dropped into the middle of the jungle. Very odd. The problem was Ford also had no clue how to grow rubber in the Amazon, and he didn't ask anyone who could. He planted the trees too close together, they got wiped out by fungus and bugs. On top of that, he enforced all these weird rules on people, like they had to dress a certain way, i.e. good old-fashioned American. There was no dancing allowed, definitely no unions. The workers had enough, and eventually they rioted. By 1934, the whole thing had basically fallen apart, and the place was left behind. In the end, it cost him millions, and the rubber output was almost nothing. Pyramiden was a Soviet mining town on a remote Arctic island in Norway. The Soviets bought it from Sweden in 1927. They built a full town from scratch here, with a school, hospital, gym, greenhouse, a music hall. By the 70s, about 1,000 people lived there. It had a hospital, a school, indoor pool, a Lenin statue. Not John, Vladimir Lenin. But in 1998, the mining company shut everything down. One day the workers left and they never came back. The buildings were just left as is. Books still sit on library shelves. Children's toys are scattered across classroom floors. There's a cafeteria where the plates and trays were never cleared. Russia still technically owns the land, and today there's a tiny skeleton crew that stays in the summer to maintain things. They do guided tours here, but it's not a functioning town anymore. In the 50s and 60s, Fort Detrick in Maryland was ground zero for two of the US government's creepiest science projects. From 1943 onward, the Army's biological warfare labs experimented with anthrax, botulism, Ebola, the list goes on. Then the CIA launched MKUltra here, a secret mind control program that dosed people with LSD, electroshock, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis, sometimes all at once. The goal is to force confessions or turn people into double agents. From 1954 to 1973, Fort Detrick also ran Operation Whitecoat, a biodefense research program where volunteers who were mostly conscientious objectors agreed to get exposed to things like rabbit fever and Q fever to help develop vaccines. It didn't involve kidnapping or LSD, but some volunteers went on to develop pretty severe health issues later on. Head out to the tip of Long Island and you'll find Camp Hero, a big radar station built in 1942 and active until 1982. Today, it's a park, but there's a spooky legend attached to the place, the Montauk Project. According to Preston Nichols, who was a former engineer who wrote about it, the government was running secret experiments under the base starting in the late 60s, and they were pretty strange. He claimed there were underground labs with a device called the Montauk Chair that boosted psychic abilities, and that there were tests involving time travel, mind control, and portals to other dimensions. There are also conspiracies about youngsters having been kidnapped for these experiments. Obviously, Camp Hero became a big inspiration for Stranger Things. In the 70s, the government started buying up land in the northern part of Boston Township, Ohio. They said it was for expanding the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Families were forced to leave, homes were boarded up, entire streets were just abandoned. But instead of bulldozing the houses or building anything, they left everything exactly as it was. And decades later, those empty buildings are still there, slowly rotting in the woods. People started noticing things that didn't make sense though. No trespassing signs everywhere, sometimes stacked one on top of the other. Locals started trading stories about blacked out government vehicles in the area, strange noises coming from the trees at night, sightings of deformed animals. Some swear there was a chemical spill or toxic waste site buried nearby, and that the park story was just a cover. There's an old school bus deep in the woods that creeps people out too. No one's sure how it got there. The windows are still fogged up and people claim to have seen shapes moving inside. It's become a bit of a landmark of this abandoned area, now known to locals as Helltown. There are also stories of satanic rituals happening here and people going in and never coming back out. Sitting in the hills of western Montana is Garnet, far enough off the beaten path that most people don't even know it's there. But back in the 1890s, it was alive with gold miners, families, shopkeepers, the whole kit and caboodle, as all the kids are saying these days. At its peak, Garnet had around 1,000 residents. But it wasn't built to last. Once the easy gold started to dry up, people started moving on. Then in 1912, a fire tore through part of the town and took a bunch of buildings with it. That was pretty much the final nail in the coffin. By the time the 40s rolled around, Garnet was empty. What makes it creepy isn't just that it's abandoned, it's how much of it is still standing. A lot of the original buildings are still there. You can walk down the main street and peek into old cabins, the saloon, the hotel, and it feels weirdly untouched. Some of the rooms still have furniture in them, tools left behind, dishes on tables. Over the years, people have claimed to hear strange things up there too, doors closing on their own, footsteps in the hotel, piano music drifting through the air at night when there's nobody around. The J.K. Wells Hotel is where a lot of these stories seem to center. Folks have seen things in the windows, heard voices, or just felt that thick kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. It's not flashy, it's not overly dramatic, but there's something about Garnet that sticks with you. Ferocia looks like it was hit by a zombie apocalypse. It is, or rather was, a seaside resort town in Cyprus that was booming in the early 70s. The beaches were packed, hotels were full, celebrities vacationed there. Bridget Bardot, Elizabeth Taylor, all that. It was the spot. But in 1974, everything just stopped. Turkey invaded Cyprus after a coup. Ferocia happened to be right in the middle of the mess. The residents were told to evacuate, and many of them left with nothing but the clothes on their backs, thinking they'd be back in a few days, but they never came back. The Turkish military fenced it off, and for decades nobody but soldiers and stray cats went in. What's left is a full-on time capsule. Hotels with some beds still out, cars from the 70s rusting in place, shops with mannequins in the windows, dresses faded from the sun. Trees are growing through the walls, vines are creeping into bedrooms. There's this eerie silence hanging over all of it. No ghost stories or urban legends in the traditional sense, but the vibe is enough. It's the kind of place that doesn't need a haunting, because it is the haunting. Well, how Mad Max can a place look? Way out in the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, you'll find two ghost towns, Humberstone and Santa Laura. These were saltpeter mining towns. And yeah, saltpeter sounds Kind of boring, but back then this stuff was very sought after. It was used in fertilizers and explosives, so people from all over came to strike it rich here. Humberstone had theaters, a swimming pool, a school, tennis courts. It was a full-on company town in the middle of nowhere. People built lives there, had families, formed communities. Then synthetic nitrates showed up, cheaper, easier, and didn't require you to live in a sun-blasted wasteland, so just like that, the whole thing collapsed. And now all that's left is rusted machinery, collapsing buildings, and peeling paint. But weirdly, a lot of it is still standing. Like the theater still has its seats, the pool, this big creepy empty pool is still there, and yeah, there are ghost stories. People have claimed to see shadowy figures walking near the schoolhouse. Some say they've heard whispers or footsteps when no one's around. Whether that's just the desert wind playing tricks or something else, who knows? Oradour-sur-Glane was a regular village in German-occupied France during World War II. Quiet, peaceful, people just trying to get through the war. Then in June of 1944, the SS rolled in. Out of nowhere, the soldiers rounded up the villagers. They separated the men from the women and the young ones and took the men to barns, executed them, and set the buildings on fire. Then the women and young people were herded into the church. Then they set that on fire too. Anyone who tried to escape was fired at. By the end of it, 642 people were dead. Only a few survived. After the war, France made the decision not to rebuild the village. They left the ruins exactly as they are. Burned out buildings, twisted bikes, and rusted sewing machines. Everything left to just sit there and decay. It's a memorial now, a permanent reminder of what happened. And walking through it is eerie as hell. No sound except maybe the wind, just stillness. And people say you could still feel something there, a weight, like the grief never really left.
Bring up this list today, we have Armero, Colombia. The story behind this town is a 20th century tragedy that serves as a reminder of the dangers of volcanoes. It's 1985 and Colombia's Nevado del Ruiz, a seemingly peaceful snow-capped volcano, decides that it's showtime. But this isn't your average volcanic eruption with just lava and ash. Oh no, this volcano went all out. The heat from the eruption melted the mountain's glaciers, creating a monstrous lahar, a deadly cocktail of water, mud, rocks, and other debris. Basically, nature's own concrete flood. This wasn't a slow-moving disaster movie scene where you can just run to higher ground. This lahar traveled with the speed and force of a freight train. Now, imagine the town of Armero situated in a valley below this ticking time bomb. Most people were caught off guard as the magnitude of the threat wasn't fully understood or communicated. So when the lahar hit, it was like a scene from a nightmare, obliterating everything in its path and leaving little time for escape. Homes, buildings, and lives were swept away in just moments. Over 25,000 people lost their lives in what would be remembered as one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in the 20th century. This tragic event was a wake-up call on the importance of volcanic monitoring and emergency preparedness, and it just went to show the true power of nature and how crucial it is to respect and understand the warning signs that it gives us. Alright, next up on our list today we have Dhanushkodi. Nestled in the southernmost tip of India, this town was not just any town, it was a bustling port, a bridge between India and Sri Lanka, brimming with life and commerce until disaster struck. Picture the vibrant markets, the sounds of daily life, and the trains chugging away. It was a hub of activity and connection. Then came that fateful day in 1964 when nature unleashed its fury. A ferocious cyclone with winds that roared like the engines of 1,000 trains struck with merciless force. The waves, as tall as mountains, crashed onto the shores, obliterating nearly everything in its path. More than 1,700 lives were lost, families were torn apart, and the town was left in ruins, submerged under the relentless waves. Today, what remains of the town is a spectral landscape. The ruins of the railway station and the church stand eerily, monuments to the town's tragic past. Visitors to this ghost town can't help but feel a chill as they wander through the remnants. Next up on our list today we have Yungay in Peru. Once a buzzing ski resort town cradled in the arms of the breathtaking Peruvian Andes, this town had no idea what was in store for it. It was the kind of place that postcards are made of, with tourists flocking to enjoy its winter sports and local charm. But in 1970, Mother Nature had a catastrophic twist in store. A mammoth earthquake struck, its epicenter alarmingly close to the town. The quake was so powerful that it dislodged a massive section of ice and rock from Mount Huascarán, Peru's highest peak, which loomed ominously nearby. Now imagine a colossal wave of ice, rock, and debris hurtling down the mountain at speeds that defy belief, completely ruining everything in its path. This wasn't a scene from a disaster movie, it was a grim reality for Yungay. In just a few harrowing minutes, the town was buried under a thick blanket of destruction, claiming the lives of over 20,000 people in one of the deadliest avalanches in history. Today, the original site of Yungay stands as a ghostly memorial to that fateful day, largely untouched except for by time and the elements. Visitors to the area can still see the remnants poking through the earth. A new Yungay has risen a few kilometers away, striving to move forward while honoring the memory of the past. Next up on our list today, we have Dalia in Austria. Nestled in the picturesque landscapes of Austria, Dalia is a village steeped in history, with its origins tracing back to the year 1143. Imagine walking through a place where every stone and corner has a story dating back almost 9 centuries. But Dalia's serene beauty hides a tumultuous past. During the grip of the bad guys regime during World War II, the village's tranquility was shattered as residents were compelled to leave their homes, their familiar life turned upside down to make way for a military training ground. After World War II, the village didn't resume its former bustle and charm. It remained uninhabited, a ghost of its past self. Yet the echoes of history linger. Today, visitors to Dalia can explore the remnants of what once was. A church that stood witness to centuries of change, a town square that once buzzed with daily life, and a graveyard where the village's ancestors rest, perhaps still holding on to their stories. Next up on our list today, we have Kadakchan in Russia. Found in the heart of Russia's vast and frost-bitten far eastern region, Kadakchan tells a story deeply etched in the annals of wartime and post-Soviet history. Initially established during the throes of World War II, the town was birthed through the toil and sweat of prisoners who were put to work in its coal mines. These mines not only fueled the war effort, but also sustained a burgeoning community against the backdrop of harsh and unforgiving landscapes. For decades, Kadakchan thrived on coal extraction, its residents carving out a life amid the extremes. However, the dissolution of the Soviet Union marked the beginning of the end for this isolated settlement. Economic turmoil ensued, leading to the closure of one of its lifeblood coal mines in the early 1990s. The town's fate was sealed in 1996 when a tragic explosion wreaked havoc, causing irreparable damage and leading to a mass exodus. By 2010, Kadakchan had become a ghost town, its abandoned buildings and desolate streets standing as eerie testaments to its very turbulent past. Once home to over 10,000 souls, its population plummeted to 0, leaving behind only memories and the chilling silence of abandonment. Today, Kadakchan exists in a peculiar limbo, captivating the curious and the adventurous who venture to explore its ruins, a contrast to the vibrant life it once nurtured.
Kayakoi looks like such a picture-perfect hill town you'd see on a postcard maybe, until you realize that no one actually lives here. It's row after row of crumbling stone houses, empty chapels, and buildings with no roofs. The windows are still hollow, the doors are long gone, and nature's slowly swallowing the place whole. It's dead silent. Peaceful, sure, but weirdly heavy. This place used to be a thriving Greek village, back when it was called Levesi. Thousands of people lived here. There were schools, churches, and markets, but in the early 1920s, everything changed. After the Greco-Turkish War, the two countries did a population exchange, literally swapped out people based on their religion. Christians had to leave Turkey, Muslims had to leave Greece, so the entire village was abandoned. Just like that. The Greek families packed up and left, and the Muslims who were supposed to take their place refused to move in. Probably just didn't want to live in a ghost town filled with other people's memories, and honestly, you can't really blame them. Today, what's left of Kayakoi is still standing. You can walk through the ruins, peek into old homes, and still see remnants of daily life from 100 years ago. Kolmanskop is what happens when too much money shows up in the middle of nowhere and then vanishes just as fast. This place in the Namib Desert is one of the driest spots on Earth, and yet at one point it had ice delivered by train, a hospital with an x-ray machine, a champagne-filled bowling alley, and wait for it, a ballroom. Never know looking at it now. In the early 1900s though, someone found diamonds literally lying in the sand, and suddenly this nothing patch of land turned into a mini German empire. Fancy villas were built in European styles. There were maids, butlers, schools, a casino. Everyone was cashing in, and no one thought it would end. But of course, it did. Once bigger diamond deposits were found further south, Kolmanskop became less important, and by the 50s, the last residents had packed up and left. Now the desert is reclaiming it room by room. Sand pours through windows, piles up in bathtubs, fills old living rooms. The buildings are still standing, just barely, but it's clear who's in charge now. The dunes. Photographers love the place. It's eerie, but it's oddly beautiful, almost like walking through a dream. Hashima Island. If you're looking at this place right now and thinking, well, that kind of looks like a battleship, you're not alone. That's where it gets its nickname, Gunkanjima, aka Battleship Island. It's the decaying skeleton of a coal mining colony that once held the title of one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Yes, on Earth. Back in the early 20th century, Mitsubishi, the car company, ran coal mining operations under the seabed here. They built this self-contained concrete maze of apartment blocks, schools, shops, and even a movie theater, all crammed onto a rock barely big enough to park a cruise ship. At its peak in the 50s, over 5,000 people lived here, all stuffed into a single slab of cement in the ocean. Then, just like that, coal fell out of favor. Oil took over and the mine shut down in 1974. Within weeks, the island was completely abandoned. Hashima's creepy factor has earned its place in pop culture as well. It showed up in Skyfall as a Bond villain's lair, but the real story here is darker. Forced labor was used here during World War II with Korean and Chinese workers under brutal conditions. It was closed off for years, but now tourists can visit, sorta. They can only let you onto a safe section. The rest is off limits because really it's just falling apart. Next up is Agdam. Agdam was once a busy city in southwestern Azerbaijan with around 40,000 people, but when the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict started, suddenly Agdam was right in the path of a full-blown war. When Armenian forces pushed in, most civilians fled. Then the city got shelled hard, and by the time the dust settled, Agdam was annihilated. People started calling it the Hiroshima of the Caucasus, and honestly, it fits. There's this eerie, quiet devastation to it that just hangs in the air. Even though no one was officially living here anymore, Agdam became a kind of scavenger's paradise too. Over the years, people picked it clean. Bricks, steel beams, furniture. If it wasn't bolted down, and sometimes, honestly, even if it was, it got carried off. What's left today is the skeleton of a city. You could still see the street layouts, what's left of the mosques, and homes that are now just hollow shells. Plymouth, Montserrat is the only modern capital city in history that got completely abandoned, and not because of war or some slow economic collapse. This one is thanks to Mother Nature. Back in the 90s, Plymouth was the heart of Montserrat, a British territory in the Caribbean. It had government buildings, homes, bars, schools, everything you could expect in a small island capital. But in 1997, a volcano that had been dormant for centuries erupted, with enough force to blanket the city in volcanic ash and mud. Entire neighborhoods disappeared. The government declared an exclusion zone, told everyone to get out, and Plymouth was left frozen in time. Today, the place looks pretty surreal. You've got the tops of buildings peeking out from ash, a clock tower half swallowed by debris. It looks like a modern Pompeii. And it's technically still the capital of Montserrat, even though nobody lives there, which is weird in itself. The rest of the island is slowly recovering. There are new towns, but Plymouth is still a ghost city. And that'll probably never change.
Next up on our list today, we are heading over to Villa Epicuén in Argentina. Imagine strolling through a place that feels like a scene straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Well, Welcome to Villa Epicuén in Argentina. This isn't just your average ghost town, it's got a backstory that could rival any thriller. A thriving lakeside resort town buzzing with tourists, laughter, and life, families soaking up the sun, kids splashing in the water, Villa Epicuén was the place to be, especially known for its therapeutic salty waters, much like the Dead Sea. But here's the twist, nature of course had its own plans. Over the decades, the lake began to swell, slowly nibbling away at the town's edges, until in the 1980s, it devoured the whole place, submerging everything under meters of water. The town disappeared, leaving only memories and submerged dreams. Fast forward a few decades and the scene shifts again. The waters recede, almost as mysteriously as they came, revealing the skeleton of Villa Epicuén. Today, it's an astonishing sight. Buildings, trees, and streets all laid bare, encrusted with salt, and frozen in time. It's a little bit spooky, incredibly intriguing, and undeniably a one-of-a-kind destination that tells the tale of the relentless passage of time. Next up today we have Plymouth in Montserrat, a place that once thrummed with life, its streets bustling with the daily hustle and bustle you'd expect from a capital city, and now it stands in stark contrast. A ghost town that is eerily silent, its buildings and streets swallowed by nature's fury. Back in the summer of 1995, the earth rumbled, and Montserrat's Soufrière Hills volcano awoke from its slumber, dramatically altering the town's fate. Ash clouds billowed into the sky and molten lava crept through the streets, prompting a mass exodus. By December, the once vibrant town was left deserted, its 4,000 residents seeking safety elsewhere. Though a few brave souls ventured back, hoping to reclaim their lives, the volcano had other plans. In 1997, another fierce eruption forced even these resilient returnees to abandon their homes for good. Today, Plymouth is an uncanny testament to the power of nature, its buildings peeking out from the ashen landscape, a town frozen in time, with a population count that's dropped to an eerie 0. So while you can't really visit Plymouth for a casual stroll or a quick bite, its story continues to fascinate and to resonate. Next up, we are heading over to Tawurga in Libya. Oh, Tawurga, a place with a tale as haunting as a ghost story, but sadly, it's all too real. Imagine a town in Libya home to about 40,000 souls living their daily lives only for everything to change when the winds of the 2011 Libyan civil war blew through. This town wasn't just touched by conflict, it was transformed by it, earning the eerie title of Ghost Town. Schools, shops, homes all abandoned, the laughter and chatter of life replaced by silence. Fast forward to 7 years post-conflict and the image of Tawurga doesn't get much brighter. The residents were forced to flee, leaving behind their homes and their lives. They didn't go far, settling in a nearby town, but in a very different setup. Instead of houses, they lived in 250 tents. Despite the conflict and the loss, the spirit of the Tawurga community persisted, their resilience shining through despite the drastic change in their living conditions. Moving on down, we are heading over to Humberstone in Chile. Imagine stepping into Humberstone, a ghost town nestled in the parched Atacama Desert, which feels like wandering onto the set of an old Western film. Once this place was buzzing with around 3,500 folks, all mingling, working, and living their lives around the booming potassium nitrate, or saltpeter, industry. Saltpeter was the gold of its time, as it was a critical ingredient in gunpowder and fertilizers, fueling agriculture and warfare worldwide. From the late 1880s to 1930, this little town was like the Silicon Valley of saltpeter, shipping off heaps of this white gold to places near and far, and playing a crucial role in global economics and even in conflicts. Then, technology advanced. Synthetic alternatives to saltpeter emerged, and just like that, the demand plummeted. The town's heartbeat slowed until it stopped altogether mid-20th century, leaving behind a time capsule in the desert. Now declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Humberstone is now an eerie yet fascinating window into the past, showing how communities can rise and fall with the tides of industry and innovation. And finally, rounding out our list today, we have Texola, Oklahoma. Oh, Texola. It's like a postcard from another time sitting quaintly along the iconic Route 66. Now, imagine a place where the echoes of the past are so palpable that you can almost hear the hustle and bustle of its heyday. That's Texacola for you. Back in the day, 1930 to be exact, 581 souls called this town home. Fast forward to today and you'll find a drastically smaller, but nonetheless fascinating population of just 35. But why such a drastic drop? Well, Texola's story is intertwined with some major historical events. Cotton was king here until it wasn't, thanks to agricultural decline. Then came the 1-2 punch of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, which turned thriving communities into ghost towns across the plains. Despite these hardships, Texola has clung to life, its resilience embodied by landmarks such as the Magnolia service station and an adorably minuscule stone-walled jail.
Alright, we're starting off the list with Inunaki Village. If you want a truly evil town, this is it. Inunaki is said to be this hidden village in a forest in Fukuoka Prefecture. There are only a small handful of residents in Inunaki, and they're not friendly. These are people who choose to go against the principles of Japanese culture. Anyone who's unfortunate enough to find themselves even just in the vicinity of Inunaki may be dragged in only to be met with the violent, sadistic people who live there. One story goes that in the early 70s, a couple's car broke down. They ventured further up the forest hoping to find help, but they came across a small empty town. It looked totally abandoned. Then out of one of the homes stepped this disheveled, crazy-eyed old man who told the couple they were in the village of Inunaki. Then he chopped them up with a sickle. So yes, Inunaki village is an urban legend, but with every urban legend, there is a nugget of truth. And the legend of Inunaki village really started with the old Inunaki tunnel. This tunnel, built in 1949, has a history so dark that it's now completely sealed off. A number of violent crimes and deaths have happened at the tunnel, to the point where stories began to spread that there was this evil village beyond it. And even though it's all sealed off now, there are also plenty of stories of the place being very, very haunted.
Tucked away and forgotten by time, Ikigo Middlegate has quite the story to tell, straddling a line between a grim past and its very current eerie persona. A spot that once echoed with the despair of World War II concentration camps has now transformed into this intriguing, albeit slightly spooky, abandoned site. Located in a US Navy housing area campground in Zushi City, the middle gate to this campground is said to have been a Japanese ammunition depot, but also a place where prisoners of war were held and executed or worked to death. Guards of the middle gate have reported seeing legless Japanese soldiers in World War II era uniforms, as well as hearing the classic disembodied voices and footsteps. It's always the footsteps that get me. I don't like it. This history is certainly grim enough to make this place one that has countless tales of hauntings and ghostly visits, but the history of this area does not stop here. In fact, it is said that the area surrounding Ikigo also happens to be the resting place of around 50 yagura, or ancient burial tombs. The tombs were built into the sides of cliffs and date all the way back to the 16th and 17th centuries. Legend also has it that this area was a battlefield for groups of samurai in the 14th century, where many people lost their heads, alright? All in all, this makes a lot of sense why this place has countless terrifying stories surrounding it. A bunch of nearly headless nicks walking around. Milady?
Next on the list we have Nichitsu, which is usually referred to as Nichitsu Ghost Town. And that's not just because it's completely abandoned either. Apparently you can still find some ghostly residents lingering around this place. Nichitsu was a tin mining town. The workers and their families had to live on site because it's a pretty good clip away from surrounding cities. At some time in the 80s though, everyone up and left, and it's not entirely known why. With most mining towns, there's always a possibility that the mines just dry up. Usually there's an economic factor, but whatever the reason was, the ghost town is said to be haunted. There's a doctor's office in the abandoned hospital that still has the remains of human organs. There's also a jar with a human brain that was there for a while, but someone stole that. Anyway, the place looks like it would be a pretty cool area to explore.
Let's take a jaunt into the eerie folds of Japan's past, right into the heart of Orianbuchi. Alright, I tried to look it up. It's not as easy to look up as you think it is, okay? So just politely let me know how to pronounce it in the comments if I got it wrong. Keyword being polite. This place isn't your average historical site. It's steeped in tales of sorrow and the supernatural. Here, the air is thick with the legend of courtesans whose lives took a tragic turn, leaving behind a legacy that's as somber as it is mysterious. The legends behind this place go back to the Warring States period. This was a period between the 15th and 16th century where there were almost constant civil wars and upheavals seen in Japan. During this time, this site had a gold mine. Of course, this meant that quite a few people were in the area because of this mine, and there were also courtesans who came here in order to give their services to the men working the mine. Unfortunately, in an attempt to keep the secret of the gold from getting out, it is said that those working the mines took the lives of the 55 courtesans in the area. Since this dark moment in history, there have been countless haunting tales from this area. It is said that the hauntings most often come at night, and people have expressed hearing mostly the screams and cries of the women who are said to haunt the area. So, are you up for a visit? This place sounds pretty horrifying. James, are you gonna go there?
Yeah, probably. Next on the list we have Yokai Village. This small village in the Tokushima prefecture has a history full of tales of yokai. If you don't know what yokai are, they're basically the demons and spirits of Japanese folklore. This village once had a good number of residents, about 15,000, but the story goes that villagers started having encounters with what they could only describe as yokai, and at some point in the 50s, a ton of people just packed their bags and started leaving town because there were demons about, which is understandable. This village was the birthplace of a lot of yokai legends, including the Konokai Jiji, which is a type of yokai resembling a short, old man who is constantly weeping. And when passersby try to comfort what looks like a small crying old man, it then latches onto them, and with the victim unable to break free from this small old man's grasp, because he's not an old man, he's a demon, the yokai then increases its weight until the poor person is just crushed to death. They've started embracing the spirits and demons said to reside there, and now hold yokai festivals and have put up tons of yokai statues. It looks like a really cool place. Alright, next up we have La Noria in Chile. Now, when I describe this place, it's gonna sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. There are tons of videos of people exploring this ghost town, and it looks exactly what it sounds like when described. An incredibly creepy abandoned town with bones, some human, a lot human, scattered around the place. Open coffins, crosses everywhere. It's really quite the vibe. This place sits in the Atacama Desert. It was once a bustling mining town, but when the mines dried up, the people started new lives, but their dead were left behind. And as the years went on, people would come to this place and loot it. Even coffins would be opened up, and items like jewelry they'd been buried with would be stolen. So tons of graves now sit out in the open with the bones of the dead still sitting inside of them. So it probably comes as no surprise that people will claim to see some unexplained things going on here, especially at night. Shadowy figures, or even just full-bodied apparitions. And of course, the haunting sounds of the angered spirits are said to echo through the night as well.
Alrighty, next up we have an ancient town with some pretty sadistic sacrificial rituals. Well, not so much a town as a temple in a town, specifically the Moch Temple located in the northwest of Peru. The temple thrived between 100 and 800 AD. The people of the town were known for producing sophisticated goods for their time, including hand-painted pottery made from molds. They also were incredibly advanced when it came to gold working, monument construction, and city planning. While at one time the town town was well known for their advancements, including their incredibly efficient irrigation systems, in 1995 they became known for something a bit different. You see, archaeologists discovered a huge sacrificial gravesite near the temple filled with the bodies of male sacrificial victims who likely did not go willingly, as it is believed many of them were travelers who met their unfortunate ends while crossing the Moche land in search of their final destinations. Murals on the walls of the temple illustrate the men's final moments, showing them naked and hogtied before being slaughtered, after which the men's skulls were turned into cups used to collect the BLOOD of the deceased so that it may be offered up as a gift to the gods. Super gross.
Next, we head over to China to discuss Kowloon Walled City. Unlike pretty much every spot on this list, I think this place would have actually been much scarier before it was abandoned. The Kowloon Walled City was this crazy, super dense, and sort of chaotic place in Hong Kong. Picture a bunch of cramped, towering buildings all squished together, a giant concrete jungle. Back in the Song Dynasty around 960 to 1279 AD, there was this cool walled garrison in Kowloon. Over time, it got kind of abandoned, and during the British colonial period, nobody really bothered about it. People just started building random structures within its walls. Fast forward to the 20th century, and it turned into this insane, unplanned mega city within a city. The buildings were like a tangled mess of staircases, pipes, and wires. It became famous for being overcrowded, and it was also basically lawless. The only ones really governing the place were the triads. It was tons of crime, and it was very dark. Because of how dense the place was, it was hard for natural light to even reach the lower levels of the city, so people had to go to the roofs of their buildings to get any light. Eventually, in the 90s, the Hong Kong government decided the place needed to go, and demolition began in March of 1993. Today, though, some of the ruins still remain.
Next up, we've got the Bangar Fort, located in Rajasthan, India. The small town was built in the 17th century by an emperor named Madho Singh as a testament of love to his son Man Singh. At its peak, the town was home to over 10,000 people. Today, living in the town is prohibited. And while tourists and locals may visit the ruins during the day, they are strictly banned from entering the area before sunrise and after sunset. And this is because of the fact that since Bangar Fort's re-establishment as an unaltered landmark in the 21st century, people who have entered the premises during these times have often heard or seen dark spirits. And those who have gone into the forts have either turned up dead or just not turned up at all. Because of this, each night before the sun sets, the forts and the grounds are evacuated, locked, and guarded. This is also why the area has earned the title of most haunted place in India. Many believe the haunting is due to a curse placed on the town during its peak by hermit Baba Balu, who was living in the area at the time. Shortly after he declared his curse, a devastating earthquake hit the town, causing its people, along with the people from 83 surrounding villages, to vanish overnight.
Next on the list is Poveglia Island in Italy. This place has a rather ominous nickname, Ghost Island, and that's not just because nobody lives there. This island is basically a mix of a former hospital and a big giant graveyard. So back in the day, during the bubonic plague in the 1700s, which was a very fun time, they used Poveglia as a quarantine spot. It was the place you'd get dumped when you were really sick. And then later on, they built a mental hospital there. So it went from a plague quarantine spot, pretty dark already, to a place where even more horrible things happened because mental hospitals were never pleasant and the inmates were never treated well. The hospital eventually closed in the 60s, and the island's been abandoned ever since. So many people died on this island that half of the soil is apparently made up of their remains, which is just wild. Today, the island is completely off limits because for some reason, people need to be told not to go to a place like this.
Just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the tranquil sanctity of Nikko's Tashugo shrine, there lies an altogether different realm. A ghostly echo of Americana right in the heart of Japan.
welcome to the Western Village, a theme park that once throbbed with the sounds of cowboy boots and saloon piano, inspired by the wild frontiers of classic westerns and the dystopian allure of Westworld. Imagine stepping into 1973, the year this very peculiar park sprang to life, a place where the Wild West met the Far East, brimming with gunslingers, saloons, and a replica of Mount Rushmore. But fast forward to 2007 and the tumbleweeds began to roll. The park closed its doors, leaving behind a tableau frozen in time, an eerie tableau that whispers tales of yesteryear to those who dare to visit. Today, the Western Village stands as a hauntingly beautiful paradox, a place where time seems to stand still amidst the decay. Urban explorers, those modern-day adventurers, flock here, drawn by the irresistible allure of its desolation and the uncanny presence of its robotic inhabitants.
And we're heading back to Tokushima Prefecture once again to discuss Nagoro. So this remote village has had a steadily declining population over the years. There were never a ton of residents, but more and more people started leaving to look for better employment opportunities. The old folks passed away. That's just what they do, and by 2019 the village that at one time had 300 plus people now only had about 27. So the place is basically a ghost town, but unlike other abandoned towns you'll come across, this one has become pretty well known for all the life-size dolls scattered throughout the streets and buildings. Tsukimi Ayano, a woman who had left the village when she was young and then came back about 20 years ago to care for her father, decided she wanted to make the place feel more lively, so she started creating all these dolls. And today, there are over 350 dolls placed throughout the village. Definitely gives the place a strange vibe. On one hand, there's this tranquil beauty to it, just quiet and pleasant. But on the other hand, there is an underlying sadness about it, kind of like in I Am Legend, where Will Smith puts up a bunch of mannequins and he starts yelling at them because they won't respond to him. That is a sad scene.
What about the Osarizawa mine? Tucked away in the verdant depths of the Akita Prefecture lies this ghostly vestige of industrial ambition. Once a thriving hub of copper extraction, this mine's veins pulsed with the lifeblood of progress until the mid-20th century. Yet, all mines have their final days, and for Osarizawa, the echoes of activity have long since faded into an eerie silence. Now, imagine wandering through the abandoned town that once buzzed with the hopes and hard work of its inhabitants. Streets where laughter and chatter once filled the air are now corridors of quiet, bordered by the crumbling relics of homes and communal spaces. There's the desolate school, standing forlorn, its empty classrooms whispering tales of generations who learned and played within its walls, now surrendered to the relentless march of nature. But it's not just about what's gone, it's about what's left behind. The mine and its ghost town are shrouded in mystery that tugs at the curious and the brave. What stories are etched into the fading walls? What secrets do these silent shafts hold?
Next on the list is Nara Dreamland. Now, unfortunately, this place has now been demolished, but for a long time it sat completely abandoned, and urban explorers would share some rather creepy stories about the place, but I'll get to that in a minute. So Nara Dreamland was a theme park in Nara, the capital city of Nara Prefecture. It opened in 1961 and was around for years before finally closing in 2006. It couldn't afford to stay open because of low attendance. The place was huge, pretty much the size of a small village, and it just sat there out of use for like 10 years. There's something I find so especially eerie and sad about abandoned theme parks. I mean, these are places that are literally built to be filled with people. Everything is made to be an overload to the senses. Larger-than-life cartoony statues are all over the place. The signs are all vibrant and colorful. You're supposed to walk through a theme park hearing laughter and screaming and the sounds of large rides zipping along the tracks. So, when these places are empty and worn down, left for nature to slowly creep in and reclaim them, it's just the polar opposite of what the place was originally intended for, and I think that just unsettles us. And it doesn't help that urban explorers would claim to hear strange sounds near the park's boats or see strange shadowy figures poking out of corners.
Dive with me into the eerie silence of Yodo Harbor, where whispers of the past mingle with the murmurs of rebuilding. A once thriving port bustling with life, suddenly silenced by nature's wrath in 2011. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami didn't just shake the ground, they shook the very soul of this place, leaving behind a ghost town where echoes of lost lives linger in the air. Now, when you stroll through Yodo Harbor, you're walking a tightrope between two worlds, the tangible buzz of reconstruction and the shadowy quiet of areas frozen in time. These neglected corners, untouched and forsaken, aren't just empty. They're charged with the stories of what was. It's as if the town itself is caught in a haunting limbo, struggling to whisper its secrets to those who dare to listen. So, if you're drawn to places where history and mystery intertwine, where every stone and silent building might hold a hidden narrative, then Yodo Harbor beckons. It's a testament to the unpredictable nature of creation and destruction, and a haunting reminder that even in our absence, stories endure, waiting to be unearthed.
And we're starting off the list with Nami, Japan. This town in Fukushima Prefecture once housed 20,000 residents, but in one night, in March of 2011, the most destructive earthquake in Japanese history hit off the coast. This caused a massive tsunami that hit a nearby power plant. After 3 meltdowns and widespread nuclear fallout, the residents were forced to evacuate. The town was completely abandoned for a year until April of 2012, when residents were allowed to slowly make their way back in, but only in 2 designated zones. Zone 3 was completely off limits and still remains so to this very day. There have been many attempts to try and rebuild the town into what it once was. Rents have been reduced. There's even been plans to build a Pokemon-themed theme park, but most people just don't want to go anywhere near the place based on the radioactive contamination, which is understandable. Number 9. Kantubek, Uzbekistan. This abandoned town sits on Vozrozdanya Island and was abandoned in 1992 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This town was built to house about 1,500 people. Most of its residents were scientists working at a top-secret USSR biological weapons testing site. This place became an absolute nightmare following a couple, little accidents that left a number of people infected with smallpox. After a field test went wrong, 2 people ended up dying. Then about a year later, 2 fishermen were found dead, likely from the bubonic plague that had leaked out of the testing facility. Then antelopes started keeling over and dying. Dead fish were being hauled out of the sea in big nets. The island became a dumping ground for anthrax in the 80s until the lab was finally closed down, with the town becoming deserted by 1992. Apparently there's plans to turn the area into a national park. I would not go anywhere near this place. In 2002, there was a US-led expedition to neutralize the anthrax, because they were scared that possible bad people were going to try and get their hands on it. Even still though, I don't know, just let bygones be bygones. Radioactive, is it ever fully gone? And at number 8, we have Craco, Italy. Man, this place looks beautiful. Just wanted to start by saying that. There's definitely an eeriness with abandoned towns, but this one has such a majestic quality about it. It doesn't look all depressing and gray like an abandoned city you'd see in Russia or something. So, Craco is a historic hilltop town located in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. Its history dates back to the 8th century when it was founded by the Greeks. The town prospered during the medieval period when its economy based on agriculture and craftsmanship, but in the 20th century, Craco faced a number of issues. In 1963, a landslide forced many residents to abandon their homes and relocate to a nearby valley. There were also earthquakes in 1972 and 1980, which further damaged the town's infrastructure, making it basically uninhabitable. The Italian government declared Craco a ghost town, and the remaining residents were forced to leave due to safety concerns. Today, the town stands as this hauntingly beautiful shell of what it once was. The buildings are crumbling, the streets are empty, at least when tourists aren't visiting. The town's also been used for a filming location for a number of movies, most notably Quantum of Solace. Next on the list is Wittenoom, Australia. This is just a very sad story. So, this town was built in 1947 in Pilbara, Western Australia, housed 20,000 residents, and was bustling with life. At one point, they had a movie theater, 2 schools, a hotel. The parents of most of the families living there, though, worked in the nearby Blue Asbestos mine. This was a time where people didn't know how harmful asbestos was. By the mid-60s, though, it became a known thing and the mine was shut down and a lot of residents up and left. The thing is, they'd already been exposed to it for so long, over 2,000 of these former residents would go on to die of asbestos-related illnesses. The area has now become known as Australia's Chernobyl. Number 6, Pyramiden. Pyramiden in Svalbard, Norway was once a thriving Soviet coal mining settlement established in 1910 by Sweden. It was later sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. The town's name translates to the pyramid in various languages, named after the pyramid-shaped mountain nearby. During its peak, Pyramiden housed a significant population. The town's economy relied heavily on coal mining, and it continued to operate under Soviet management until the early 90s. But in 98, Pyramiden was abruptly abandoned when mining ceased. The residents left behind buildings, possessions, and remnants of this once vibrant community, and today Pyramiden stands frozen in time as a ghost town. And the harsh Arctic climate has preserved the town remarkably well. Buildings remain standing, showcasing this Soviet-era architecture and interiors, and the town's infrastructure, including the swimming pool, school, cultural center, still eerily intact.
Number 5, we got Pyramiden, Svalbard, Norway. The archipelago of Svalbard, located between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to about 2,145 humans. Not a lot. 1,000 polar bears and one seriously bone-chilling ghost town. Pyramiden, named for the pyramid-shaped mountain looming nearby. Pyramiden came to prominence in the 1930s, when the Soviets took ownership of the area's coal fields and quickly began mining operations. After World War II, they started spending more money on the enterprise, building hospitals, cafeterias, and houses, all in the block-style fashion typical of the Soviet-era architecture. The biggest hit came in 1996 when an airplane flying from Moscow to Svalbard crashes en route, killing all 141 passengers on board, many of them Pyramiden residents. The tragedy slashed morale, and it was fully abandoned in 1998. As for the site today, Rachel Newer of Smithsonian Magazine sums it up perfectly. It was as if several hundred people had abruptly stopped what they were doing and simply walked away. And finally, in at number 1, when it comes to the creepiest place in America, no one can miss Bannock Ghost Town because of its paranormal stories. This old mining town is located near Grasshopper Creek in Montana. The area is famous as a National Historic Landmark and operates as a state park in the US. The photos of this place are wild. Literally, it looks like the quintessential Wild Wild West. To enter Bannock, follow the easiest ways to get there. From Dillon, you can take the interstate highway route to quickly reach your destination. It was famous as a mining town, but then moved towards a visiting place, and gradually the town got empty from the residents before the 1960s. Now visitors come to explore the unlocked buildings.
Next up, we've got Caldara, yet another town in Rajasthan, India, with a pretty sordid past. It is said that around 300 years ago, Caldara was quite a prosperous village where townsfolk lived happily, and despite the area's dry agriculture, were able to grow incredibly abundant crops throughout the years. It wasn't until the arrival of a debaucherous Prime Minister, Salem Singh, that things started to go downhill. When Salem arrived in the town, he set his sights on a beautiful young woman. He claimed he would marry her by any means necessary, including force. He warned the villagers that any attempt to protect the girl and thwart the marriage would result in grave consequences for their lands. And so, the villagers basically said screw it. The entire population of the town, including the young woman that Salem had hoped to marry, left Caldara, but not before they put a dark curse on its barren lands, ensuring that Salim would never be able to reap the ill-earned rewards of what the villagers had sown. To this date, the small town of Caldara remains abandoned, in almost the same state it had been left in so many years ago, minus the fruitful harvests, of course. Those who have visited the ancient grounds have told of dark forces that they feel are determined to protect the uninhabitable status of the area as per the villagers' curse, which had been designed so that no one would ever be able to settle in the area again.
Next on the list, we have the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere, Wittenoom, in Western Australia. This town was surrounded by asbestos mines. There were rich asbestos deposits in the surrounding hills, and back in the day, asbestos was in high demand, being used in construction as a fire resistant and for insulation. So the town grew pretty rapidly as miners and their families settled in the area. Wittenoom was a bumping community. There were schools, shops, a movie theater, but as the years went on and concerns about the health risks associated with asbestos exposure began to be a thing, it became pretty obvious that people were living in a death trap. By the 60s and 70s, the health hazards of asbestos became a well-known thing and the demand for it really dried up. The Wittenoom mine closed in 1966, which had pretty much been the sole source of income for the town, and on top of that, the negative health effects were starting to become pretty apparent. By the 2000s, the town had officially been shut down and only a handful of holdouts remained, but as of 2022, there's no one left, and in 2023, the place started getting demolished completely.
Okay, next on our list today we have Cinco Saltos, an Argentinian town with a pretty dark past, obviously. The area in which the town resides receives very little sunlight, providing it with a quite fittingly dark and gloomy aura year-round. On many occasions, Cinco Saltos has been referred to as the City of Witches, this being largely due to the fact that, historically, many residents of the area had been dedicated practitioners of black magic, namely necromancy and witchcraft. It is said that in ancient times, witches would often perform occult rituals in the town. One of the more commonly performed was a ritualistic sacrifice of young men and women on the Pellegrini Lake that ran through the center of the town. It is said that to this day, anyone who stands near the lake at night comes to know the disembodied screams of the many victims said to have lost their lives by the river so long ago.
And lastly, we have probably the most apocalyptic looking place on the list, Centralia in Pennsylvania. The town's streets are cracked and smoke constantly rises from the ground. It's hard to believe this place actually exists. It looks like a set from The Walking Dead, but that's because a coal mine fire has been burning beneath the town since 1962. The story begins with a landfill fire, but that was intentionally ignited near an abandoned coal mine entrance. Unfortunately, the fire unexpectedly spread to the coal mines beneath the town, creating a continuous underground blaze that just hasn't stopped, and this has caused some problems, primarily all the sinkholes. Imagine a sinkhole opening up with fire spewing out of it, like you'd think you were literally being dragged into hell. So yeah, people don't live here anymore, shocker. Most of the buildings have now been demolished. In the 80s, the US government allocated funds to relocate the remaining residents, and the local zip code was this.
Number 8, Bodie, California. Now this is one old west ghost town you're looking for. Once home to 10,000 people, Bodie boomed in the late 1880s after gold was found in the hills surrounding Mono Lake. Not long after though, Bodie transitioned into a period of steady decline until reaching ghost status around 1915 according to California Department of Parks and Recreation records. So why is this city such in great shape today? Well, you could thank the state of California for adopting the town and turning it into a state historic park in 1962. Number 6, we're bringing you Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Warning, this is quite a dark story. On June 10th, 1944, German troops raided the village of Oradour-sur-Glane and murdered 642 men, women, and children. Is this real life right now? Well, National Geographic reports, after the massacre, the military set fire to the churches, barns, and homes, leaving behind only a few surviving residents. The village has remained untouched since the horrific accident, serving as a shrine to those who died that that June day.
And at number 5, Bannock, Montana. This abandoned town in Beaverhead County, Montana was founded in 1862 after the discovery of gold in Grasshopper Creek. It quickly became a booming mining town, attracting thousands of prospectors and settlers seeking fortune in the gold fields. With the prospect of wealth, though, came a ton of violence and lawlessness. In 1863, the infamous Plummer Gang, led by Henry Plummer, became the town's sheriff, secretly organizing a gang of outlaws who terrorized the area. There were a series of robberies, stagecoach holdups, violent deaths happened as a result. The citizens, fed up with this rampant crime, formed the Vigilance Committee, which eventually captured and hanged over 20 members of this gang, including Plummer, in a single night. Shootouts, barroom brawls, other violent incidents, it was just happening all the time here back in the day. It was your classic Wild West town. But as the gold reserves dwindled and new mining opportunities came about in other places, the town's population started to decline. Today, Bannock stands as this well-preserved ghost town with over 60 historic structures remaining, including houses, saloons, and a schoolhouse. Because of its violent history, though, some visitors and locals believe the place to be haunted. Numerous ghost stories and paranormal encounters have been reported over the years. Next on the list, we have Frisco in Beaver County, Utah. This was a mining town that boomed in the late 19th century. Established in the 1870s, it was named after the San Francisco Mountains. The miners extracted silver, lead, and zinc from nearby mines. During its heyday, Frisco was notorious for its lawlessness and violence. The town earned a reputation as one of the wildest mining camps in the West. Shootouts, brawls, and other violent things were common. At one point, multiple men would die violently on a nightly basis. I've heard up to 12, which is insane. I don't know if that's true. 12 a night? How would you even have people left after like a month? But anyway, but as the mines were depleted and economic opportunities started to die down, the town's population began to decline. By the 1920s, the place was mostly abandoned. It's now a complete ghost town with abandoned structures, crumbling homes, and decaying industrial facilities. Number 3, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia used to be a lively, you guessed it, coal mining town in Columbia County. Back in the mid-1800s, coal mining really kicked off, and the town prospered through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but trouble began in 1962 when a fire started in the coal mines beneath the town. Nobody knows exactly how it began, but it's believed to have started in a landfill and abandoned strip mine pit. Efforts to put out the fire failed, and it kept burning underground. By the 80s, it became clear the situation was just dire. Carbon monoxide was seeping from the fire. The government stepped in, and in '84, a law was passed to move Centralia's residents. Most buildings were torn down, and people were relocated to nearby towns. Even today, though, like smoke and toxic gases continue to rise from the ground. It's very apocalyptic looking. In its second place, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town located in Chaffee County, Colorado. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was once a thriving mining town, mostly focusing on gold and silver mining. There was a general store, hotels, saloons. Over the years, as mining activities started to die down, residents left St. Elmo, and by the 1920s, the town became mostly abandoned. But today, many of its original buildings still stand. This place is a ghost town in more ways than one, though. Annabelle Stark, also known as Dirty Annie, was one of the last residents of the town. She lived there with her brother Tony Stark, who suffered from mental health issues. As the town started to empty, Annabelle and Tony were among the few who still remained, and Tony's mental state deteriorated further due to the isolation and lack of social interaction. He was often seen walking the streets, muttering to himself. Annabelle, caring for her brother, lived a reclusive life in their decaying family home. Dirty Annie Stark became something of a local legend, known for her resilience and determination to stay in St. Elmo despite its abandonment. Some reports suggest that Annabelle and Tony were eventually the very last two residents of the town, refusing to leave even when most of the buildings around them were completely empty. Today, this ghost town is said to be haunted by the ghost of Dirty Annie, still roaming the empty streets at night as its ghostly protector. And finally, we have Ardres-sur-Glane in France. The 10th of June, 1944 was a dark day for the residents of this quiet farming village. SS Major General Heinz Bernhard sent his troops in the Waffen SS Panzer Division to the village in retaliation against French resistance activity in the area. They wanted to send a message, so they destroyed the entire village and pretty much everyone in it. Even people just passing by the area were dragged into the massacre. In the end, only 6 people managed to escape. These victims were just civilians, mostly being women and children. People were taken to barns where they were down with machine guns. Others were loaded into a church which was set on fire. Anyone attempting to escape through the windows were gunned down. It was about as nightmarish as it gets. And today, what remains of the village still stands, left exactly as it was after the massacre. A haunting reminder of the atrocities that took place on that day.